And then let's press Shift A, and under Mesh, add a monkey. S to scale, tap W 2 or 3 times. Well, 2 will be fine to give it some smoothing here. If under Add Modifier with this monkey head selected, we click this under the Generate category, we can add a Mirror Modifier. As soon as I add that Mirror Modifier, it doesn't appear that anything has changed. And that's because this object was already perfectly symmetrical. But if I were to press Tab to go into Edit Mode and select, say, a face over here and tap E to extrude, we then see the changes happen dynamically on the other side. The way modifiers work on an object is that they are procedural. Each modifier below is acting as though all the other effects of the modifiers above it have been permanently applied to the object's mesh. The reason why I'm telling you this is I want you to understand why it's bad to have a mirror modifier on top of our subsurface modifier. It's bad because the core amount of faces of this Suzanne head is only about 504 faces, as we can see up here. So if we were to hide the effect of this subsurface modifier, this is what this object actually looks like with no effects on it, and this is how many faces that the computer is having to generate. But if we turn the visibility of that subsurface modifier back on, and we press Tab to go back into object mode, we get a proper reflection of how many real faces the computer is having to generate, which is like 15,000. The mirror modifier in its little mirror modifier brain is having to mirror all this mesh, all these 15,000 faces, or actually it's half of this, like I guess 7,700 or so faces, instead of just that 500 faces. And we're getting the same exact effect. So that's a lot of waste of resources. Just make sure you get that mirror modifier up at the top of the stack for most situations. Just wanted to mention that. And so normally you want to actually have half of your mesh deleted before ever adding this mirror modifier. But because we went ahead and already added it for demonstration purposes, what we're going to need to do before we select this half of the mesh to delete it is actually turn off our cage editing of our subsurface modifier. And the reason for that is if I press Z to go into wireframe and then press B to do a border select, what I want to do is select this half of the mesh to delete it. But when I select it, because cage editing is on in conjunction with this mirror modifier, it selects everything on the other side. So we don't want to do that because we don't want to delete both sides here. So let's just turn off the cage editing. And then now if I press B to do a border select and select all the mesh on this side that we don't want here, we can then delete it. Notice too that I selected everything to the left of this line of vertex points here. We want to leave the dividing line of mesh there always so that the object has something concrete to give it that nice even division line. So let's, with all that stuff to the left of that line selected, let's tap X to delete. And notice too we're in front view. And then so now if we press Z to go back into solid viewport shading, and I'm going to go ahead and turn back on my cage editing button here. And so now this mirror modifier is properly generating this mesh, and this is cool. So if I press my middle mouse button to zoom out of that orthographic view, we can scale, rotate, move any side of this mesh, extrude, etc. We could duplicate by pressing D here, E to extrude, do anything like that. And it will all be properly dynamically generated as we go ahead and work with it. So if I were to tap A to select all of this mesh here and then press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, when I go to move the mesh apart, you see that the object remains split in half, but we can actually turn on clipping, which will cause these to merge together when we have merge also selected. So if I turn on clipping here, press G to grab, hold middle mouse to constrain to bring this mesh towards its other side here, we see that when it gets close enough, it actually suctions towards each other and becomes one. So for instance, this vertex point and this vertex point, after actually meeting each other, become fused into one, which is good. It's actually this merge limit is what we can use to control that value. So if I were to actually increase this, then the farther gap that there is between each one of these points, it will still kind of suction together. So it's actually this merge value here which is causing these to kind of suction towards each other, but the clipping prevents the mesh from going too far over into its generated effects. So if I were to hold G, middle mouse to constrain, you see once I bring this too far, it just slices right into itself. But if we turn clipping on, then it forms an imaginary binding wall at the center of the object, stopping it from merging into each other. So, okay, so I went a little in depth on this mirror modifier. That's because I wanted you to have a decent foundation of what it was, how it works, how it's best to use it. But in application, we can actually use this a lot quicker. I'll show you kind of a generic workflow that I use, wherein we actually use a hotkey dedicated to creating a mirror modifier, which is Shift W when we are in object mode. So if I press Tab to go into object mode, press X to delete that thing, and then press Shift C to recenter my cursor. So a typical workflow of mine would be to say Shift A, add a cube, press 1 to go into front view, zoom in on it, Tab to go into edit mode, Z for wireframe, and then say press Shift W to do a loop cut here, and then just double click that to confirm that. And so now I've created a dividing line down this mesh, so everything on the left side of it is ready to be deleted. So I'll press 1 to go into front view, Shift scroll down for vertex selection, B to do a box select. And of course, there's not much on the left side of this object, but I will still select everything to the left of this dividing line, making sure we don't actually select any of the dividing line itself. X to delete. And then if I press Tab to go back into object mode and Z for solid viewport shading, now I have the symmetrical half side of the mesh I want to work with. So rather than coming up here and going to add modifier and adding a mirror modifier, I can just tap Shift W and this will add one for me. The Shift W hotkey has a really cool added bonus feature to it though. There are times maybe when you are working in a different view, or maybe you want it to mirror in another direction and you need to change this. So you can actually just tap Shift W again and again until you find that the mirror modifier is mirroring along the axis you want it to, rather than having to come up here, interrupt your workflow, and just try to figure out which axis you need this to mirror on. For instance, I press X to delete that, Shift A, add a monkey head, tap W a few times, give it some smoothing, 1 to go into front view, Tab to go into edit mode, Shift scroll down for vertex selection, Z to go into wireframe, and then B to do a border select. And then of course I want to select everything just across that dividing line, tap X to delete, and press Z to go back into solid viewport shading. Say this object was actually rotated in a different direction. So say I press 1 to go into front view, A to select all, R to rotate, hold Control to constrain while I'm doing this and just get it to rotate flat there. Say I had an object like this, and then I went to object mode, and say I wanted to mirror this, so I tap Shift W. But when I do, I don't get the result I was looking for. With this hotkey, once you've pressed Shift W once, all you have to do is keep tapping Shift W until it mirrors in the direction that you want, which this is the direction we want. So what we would do then is press Tab to go into edit mode, G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, turn on clipping here, and then we have our object mirrored in the way that we want it to. If I press Tab to go into object mode and press 1 to go into front view, let's press R to rotate and hold Control to constrain this and just get it sitting back up on its head here. We can use this mirror object option to select an object that we want the object we're mirroring to work with. So say for instance, I were to Alt right click over here to get my 3D cursor to snap to some face near the ear here. And then press Shift A and add, say, this torus shape. Press S to scale, R to rotate, and middle mouse to constrain to get this to rotate like this. Then hold Control to get it to snap there. Tap W a few times and G to grab. And so maybe I had something like some kind of little earring or something here on this ear. If we press Shift W to add a mirror modifier to this object here, we can actually get whole objects to mirror around other objects by selecting an object here in the object's mirror modifier. So say I wanted this earring I was making to mirror exactly over here on this side. So I would just select this Suzanne head here as the object I want it to be mirroring around. So I would click here, and then in this drop down list select Suzanne. And when we do that, we see that it's not mirroring on the axis we want. So once again, we just tap Shift W until we see the results we want to see. So that's kind of the mentality behind that. It's just, if it's not working, wail on Shift W until it is. And there you go. So if we were to press tab to go into edit mode, we could then, Alt select a ring here, Shift Alt select another ring here, maybe press S to scale, do something like that. And we've got these results on both sides. Super cool. The last thing I want to mention is that the mirror modifier is awesome for tasks like these, but if you're going to paint or sculpt your object, or you're going forward with your object, a lot of times you'll want to go ahead and apply that mirror modifier before taking that next step. We could go ahead and apply this, and now if we press tab to go into edit mode, this is one complete object here. And so just wanted to mention that sometimes it's good to apply that mirror modifier before going to paint, sculpt, or do things like that to your objects.